Welcome. My name's Lynn Jimison. I'm Chair of Scottish CND. Welcome to all of you. But especially welcome to those of you representing the Marshall Islands. We are honoured that you could be with us. The 1st of March is the date of the first detonation of a nuclear weapon in the Marshall Islands, the first of a series of deadly explosions that changed the world for all of us. The 1st of March is marked as a day of remembrance for the victims and the survivors of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, and by those of us who stand around the world alongside Marshall Islanders and against the harms of nuclear weapons. As we observe this Remembrance Day, we also acknowledge the wider suffering caused to the indigenous people of many nations by the development, the production, the so-called testing and the use of nuclear weapons. From Kazakhstan to Japan, from the islands of Kiribati to the Navajo Nation, to the veterans in Scotland and the UK. Please join me in marking a minute's silence in commemoration of all who have lost their lives because of nuclear testing, because of nuclear weapons, because of their production and their use. Those who've lost their health, their livelihood and their futures as a consequence of nuclear weapons.
Hello everyone at the CND, my name is Ewan and today I'll be playing a lament for you on the Scottish small pipes. The tune I'm going to be playing is called Flowers of the Forest and it's traditionally only heard in times of mourning and solemn contemplation, I guess. It's traditionally taboo to play it in any other context, and so pipers around the world practice this tune in secret so as not to let anyone else hear it, apart from when it's played at events. We chose to play it on the Scottish small pipes because it's a much sweeter and quieter tone that we thought corresponded with the quiet contemplation that this event embodied. I'm a friend of Kate and David's, and I had no idea about what was going on in the Marshall Islands up until this point. So I'm very happy to be taken on board on this project, and I hope that my music can help spread the word about what CND is up to at the minute and the news about the Marshall Islands. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the tune.
Hi there. My name is David Kelly. My partner Kate and I are active members of the Glasgow branch of the Scottish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. We also work with Peace Education Scotland, a charity whose aims, as the name suggests, seeks to improve understanding of the issues associated with nuclear weapons. It was while working on an educational module associated with the testing of nuclear weapons that we came across the story of the Marshall Islands. With only 1 hour's drive from our home to Europe's largest stockpile of nuclear warheads, you might think we'd enough on our doorstep to worry about. The truth of the matter is that these weapons and their legacy are so poisonous that 12,000 kilometres from Glasgow to the Runit Dome in the Marshall Islands is our doorstep. We in Britain have a sorry history of colonial oppression driven by greed and racism. We used to be called an empire. The contempt for the culture and safety of the Marshall Islanders reminds us of the worst of our own imperial legacy. On the 1st of March 1954, the USA detonated an experimental bomb in Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The explosion was 1,000 times bigger than the bomb which destroyed Hiroshima. That this experiment was conducted close to where people were living is beyond our comprehension. The wind took the fallout to Rongelap and Uturik atolls. It was 2 days before medical help reached the islanders. In 2012, the United Nations sent a special rapporteur, Kaelin Georgescu, to the USA and RMI to listen to the concerns and stories of the people and make recommendations. It was reading this report that led Kate and I to ask our colleagues at Scottish CND to support the idea of this event, to raise the profile of the injustice of the treatment of the Marshall Islanders. The 19 pages of the report make uncomfortable reading. The last 3 pages are recommendations, and very few of those are implemented. It is deeply shocking that these nuclear experiments were carried out in an inhabited country. The rapporteur said that a durable solution has yet to be found to the displacement of communities affected by nuclear testing more than 60 years ago. His report is the cornerstone of our appeal. Yes, this is a day of remembrance, but the tragedy is still unfolding. We respect the lives of those blighted by the nuclear poison best if we change the future informed by their sacrifice. The link to this report and the addendum where the government of the Marshall Islands commented on the report can be found in the Eventbrite invitation. I would urge you to read these. His final recommendation is that the international community stands in solidarity with the people of the Marshall Islands. We do this today. We look forward to the day that all of the recommendations are implemented. Thank you for watching.
Hi. Well, I want to thank Scottish CND for the honour of being here, being invited to speak today in remembrance of all of those many Marshallese people who have found themselves still exiled from their homeland by a high-handed and arrogant colonial power approach taken towards them by successive US governments. To be removed from the beautiful island home of your families and ancestors so that these can be used as targets for nuclear testing over many years is a crime. Now, I've heard the Nuclear Claims Tribunal awarded $2 billion in damages, but that only $4 million has been paid out and that there's no enforcement mechanism in place. So that's an abuse that continues to take place. It's an abuse of human beings. I believe that the United Nations must be the venue for this situation to be challenged, and that all concerned peoples around the world should make their voices heard in support of the people of the Marshall Islands. The mindset that allowed these events to take place is, of course, international, as has been mentioned. And here in Scotland, it was revealed to us that in the 1950s, the British government had plans in place to use the area around the town of Wick in the north of our country as a test site for nuclear explosions. And the only reason that this didn't go ahead was that the naturally very wet weather in that area was causing damage to the sensitive electronics of the devices which were to measure the explosions. Not because of the sensitivity to nuclear explosions of the 7,000 people who live in the area. They and their homes were to be an afterthought, if considered at all. This was kept an official secret until 30 years later. And the British government then moved their test to the Kalgoorlie Desert in South Australia because it's very dry there, so the machines would be okay. And the people whose homeland that is, being Aboriginals, would have no importance whatsoever to the British government. I've got a message from our First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, and it's, Dear Deputy Permanent Representative Lanway, please convey my and the Scottish Government's kindest good wishes to the people of the Republic of the Marshall Islands and to their government. We here in Scotland admire the dignity and strength of the Marshallese people in the face of these many years of adversity through the loss of homeland held so dear. The people of Scotland stand beside you as fellow human beings and wish you success in your work to achieve your human rights in what compensation is due to you for your loss over these many years. Now, I would like to say that I would like to welcome the Deputy Permanent Representative, Sam Lanway, representative of the Permanent Mission of the Marshall Islands to the UN in Geneva. And DPR Lanway, thank you very much for joining us here today. And I would like to now introduce you to our gathering here and invite you to speak to this Scottish CND Day of Remembrance for the Marshall Islands, and all best wishes to you and your people. Thank you.
To start by thanking the organizers of this event for your great work. We are honored to have been invited to this year's commemoration of Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day. Home in our islands, as some of you may be aware, we are commemorating today's anniversary with the theme, We Are Not Alone. With this message, we are acknowledging the solidarity among other frontline communities in our shared journeys for justice, and with this event, we are once again reminded that we are not alone. The Republic of the Marshall Islands has first-hand experience with the horrific effects of nuclear weapons, and this occasion is an important one in our nuclear legacy. March 1 marks the 67th anniversary in the Marshall Islands of the US hydrogen bomb test, codenamed Bravo. Not only does this anniversary serve to remind us of the sacrifices and damages we endured from nuclear weapons on that day, but it also reminds us to honor and support the victims and survivors of nuclear testing throughout the Marshall Islands. Between 1946 and 1958, the US government detonated 67 thermonuclear atmospheric tests in the Marshall Islands. The scale of these 67 tests in the Marshall Islands is equivalent to a detonation of 1.7 Hiroshima bombs every day for 12 years. The March 1, 1954 Bravo test was also the most powerful nuclear device ever detonated by the United States, which at 15 megatons was 1,000 times the force of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1944. This test rained heavy fallout on nearby inhabited atolls and ushered in a new era of radiation-related studies on humans, the trauma of which continues to be felt today in the Marshall Islands. The United States government's decision to proceed with the Bravo test despite knowing that the winds would carry the fallout to nearby inhabited islands, represents a deep sadness in our nuclear legacy story, matched only by the sadness of the forced displacement of the Bikini and Eniwetok people from their island homes to accommodate the other test sites. The promise of a temporary displacement would turn into one that persists today for the people of Bikini and Rongelap atolls, whose homelands remain unsafe and too dangerous for their return. As a result, these communities have been forced to connect to new lands, not of their own, and learn new ways to adapt and survive. Cumulative long-term impacts on our health and environment are well studied, but too many uncertainties still exist, including the impacts of radiation exposure on future generations. Cancer rates are abnormally high among Marshallese people, and illnesses that were never known prior to the testing period are now prevalent throughout the islands. When the Marshall Islands gained its independence from the United States in 1986, the US government provided initial funding of $100 million to establish the Nuclear Claims Tribunal. The tribunal was the mutually agreed upon forum for hearing all claims of personal injury and property damages arising out of the US nuclear testing program. The tribunal is no longer in operation due to insufficient funds to adequately respond to the scale of damages that were revealed throughout its years of operations. We continue to explore avenues with the United States to acknowledge the manifest inadequacy of its initial funding provision to support nuclear-related damages so that the tribunal can continue its work. Today, a stark physical symbol of the US nuclear testing era sits at sea level at the end of a small island in Eniwetok Atoll in the northern Marshall Islands. The runic dome is a massive concrete structure covering an unlined crater filled with over 100,000 cubic yards of radioactively contaminated soil and debris left over from the testing activities. Due to the normal wear and tear of concrete, as well as rising sea levels, the runic dome exterior has started to crack in some places, and the radiation inside the dome is flowing freely with the lagoon water that meets its outer edges. As the sea level rises and the high tide events become more frequent, it is not difficult to sense the impending grave threat that a low-level nuclear waste facility poses to its surrounding environment, particularly to the health of the community living nearby. A threat of this scale requires a response of equal scale, and the Marshall Islands is working with the US and other partners to help us address and prevent a potentially looming disaster. Our nuclear story is born of tragedy, but it is a story of strength and resilience as well. The Marshall Islands has been taking various steps to address the nuclear legacy we inherited. In the Marshall Islands National Strategy for Nuclear Justice, which was adopted in 2019, one of the 5 key pillars is focused on building our national capacity to monitor, understand radiation impacts on our environment, and to take action where required. In line with this effort, the Marshall Islands has also extended invitations to the special rapporteurs on the right to a healthy environment, on toxic waste, and on the right to truth, justice, reparation, and non-recurrence to conduct visits to the Marshall Islands. Though these and other initiatives, the Marshall Islands is continuing its resolve and determination to work with our closest ally, the United States, and our other allies in the global community, to bring attention to the ongoing health and environmental impact of nuclear weapons that we continue to grapple with today. The tragic events of the 1st of March 1954 will not be forgotten by the people of the Marshall Islands, and we ask our friends in the global community to continue to stand in solidarity with us, not only on this occasion, but throughout our journey towards justice. We are committed to ensuring that our future generations are educated about our nuclear legacy so that they will continue to carry the stories of sacrifice and survival forward. We hope that they too will know that they are not alone. Como Dada, and I thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, as Director of Interfaith Scotland, it is a great honour for me to be here with you today on this important Marshall Islands Day of Remembrance in honour of the victims and survivors of nuclear testing. I would like to take this opportunity to also thank the Glasgow branch of the Scottish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and Peace Education Scotland for inviting me. The USA began nuclear testing in the Pacific in 1946, but 1st March has been chosen as the Day of Remembrance, as it was on 1st March 1954 that the United States of America detonated the Castle Bravo bomb, the most powerful artificial explosion in history, and a nuclear bomb 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that was used in Japan in Hiroshima. The testing programme from 1946 onwards and the 1954 devastating bombing impacted most acutely on the people living in the Marshall Islands. But it will also have impacted on the wider Pacific, and I would venture probably it impacted on the whole world. Anyone who reads the UN report by Special Rapporteur Kalin Georgescu, published in 2012, will know that this testing programme led to the death, severe illness, displacement, poverty, cultural dislocation and humiliation of the people of the Marshall Islands, and severely damaged the natural habitat of that beautiful part of that beautiful space really of planet Earth. And it devastated the way of life of a self-sufficient indigenous people. In his own words, the UN rapporteur said, "The nuclear testing resulted in both immediate and continuing effects on the human rights of the Marshallese, including radiation from the testing resulting in fatalities and acute long-term health complications. The effects of radiation have been exacerbated by near irreversible environmental contamination, leading to the loss of livelihoods and lands. And moreover, many people continue to experience indefinite displacement." Georgescu made many recommendations which can be read in his report, and you can get that online. But his final recommendation was that we stand in international solidarity with the Marshallese people as they face the challenge of overcoming the legacy of nuclear testing. So today, I am honoured to be standing along with all of you in solidarity with the Marshallese people. In our solidarity with the brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, and children of these islands, we remember and we grieve. So what are we remembering today? We're remembering that the USA from 1946 to 1958 used this area of the Pacific for a nuclear testing program, where over 60 nuclear bombs were detonated in the region. As mentioned, at least one of them was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb, the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. So all of you gathered here know and are remembering that this bombing in the Pacific has had terrible long-term impacts on the Marshallese Islanders. But just for a moment, let's remember and grieve for those that suffered the immediate impacts of the bombing. According to the testimony from survivors, in the immediate aftermath of the nuclear testing, white ash fell from the sky. Shortly thereafter, people began to experience skin burns, hair loss, finger discoloration, nausea, and other symptoms of acute radiation poisoning. They also provided testimony of observing and experiencing ailments that they had never experienced before, including cancers and growth retardation in children. We cannot imagine what it would have been like to have one of the mightiest nations on the planet using your island for such tests, and using your island for such tests without really giving you an opportunity to develop a true understanding of what the implications of those tests would be. So what would this mean for your island, your health, and your way of life? But however, the Marshallese Islanders did know something was seriously wrong, and they tried to get the world to hear their cry. On 1st March 1954, the 15 megaton Castle Bravo test exposed thousands in the area to radioactive fallout. And only 2 months later, on the 6th of May 1954, the Marshallese people filed a petition with the United Nations Trusteeship Council regarding the nuclear testing, which received a hearing on the 20th of August 1954. In the petition, the Marshallese people said that they were not only fearful of the danger to their persons from these deadly weapons, but they were also concerned for the increasing number of people who were removed from their land, and they requested that all experiments with lethal weapons in this area be ceased immediately. The bombing did not stop, and their voice was not heard. Then, when the tests continued, the Marshallese filed another petition on the 9th of March 1956, in which they reiterated their previous concerns over the nuclear testing. And in response to this second petition, a representative of the United States of America answered. Nothing would please the United States more than to be able to comply with the wishes of the Marshallese people, that the nuclear tests be discontinued in their islands. But this is not yet possible. As long as there's a threat of aggression, elementary prudence requires the United States to continue its tests, and that further tests are absolutely necessary for the eventual well-being of all the people of this world. Reassuring the Marshallese that all possible precautionary measures would be undertaken for before such weapons were exploded. Of course, we all know that such precautions were not taken. So again, the voices of the Marshallese people were not heard. I say that the world has still not really heard. The Marshallese are still suffering the impact of the bombing of the islands, and in fact the whole of humanity is in serious threat from the leakage of the Runnet Dome, a dome housed on the island of Runnet, where the USA buried tons of contaminated earth, a huge concrete dome of poison that is increasingly unstable due to climate change and rising sea levels, and the resultant leakage is threatening and will threaten our whole planet. It's perhaps difficult for many of you here in Scotland to imagine what life might have been like for the Marshallese people before all this began. So I want to share with you a personal experience of living in the Pacific, in the hope that it will increase empathy for the Marshallese people and what they may have lost. For 5 years, from 1997 to 2002, I lived with my husband and children on the Pacific island of Samoa. It was the most powerfully spiritual experience of my life. It was an experience that demonstrated to me the central, spiritual, life-affirming centrality of place to the people of the Pacific. Their oral culture weaves tales of morality, connection, nature, and the gods into the everyday lives of the islanders. Place is where the ancestors reside. Place is where relatives are buried. Place is the environment where all life happens. The land is life, and life is the land. This is what I found in Samoa, and although I have not visited the Marshall Islands, I can imagine that the land is the beating heart of the Marshallese people. In fact, the UN Special Rapporteur to the Marshall Islands in 2012 identified this and stated, "The Marshallese, as indigenous peoples, have a culturally distinctive relationship to land." He called upon the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which the United States has endorsed, underlining the right of Indigenous peoples to the lands, territories, and resources that they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired. In this regard, states have an obligation to give legal recognition and protection to these lands, territories, and resources, with due respect for the customs, traditions, and land tenure systems of the Indigenous peoples concerned. To Pacific Islanders, their land is their beating heart. I really want those gathered today to feel this in some small way. Now, I've been referring to the Marshall Islands, islands that were inhabited and existed long before Mr. Marshall from Scarborough found them. I looked up what the Indigenous people name their islands and found so many were named either after a specific feature of the land or of the natural world. So these are the Marshall Islands, and this is how they're described by the Marshallese people. This is just some of the islands. So Ratak is a chain of islands, and Ratak means sunrise. On this chain are islands that are named things such as Lagoon Wave, Orange Flower Isle, Large Lagoon, Frigate Bird, Southern Flower Island, and I love this one, Island on which one can overeat, indicating the lushness and abundance of this particular island, which I think is pronounced Wotje, W-O-T-J-E. So that then there's another chain of islands called the Ralik chain of islands, which means sunset. And these islands include the island of Currants, the land of many coconuts. Now, the land of many coconuts actually is what was renamed Bikini Island. The island that moves, facing beauty, the island to break or harvest the fruit, calm waters, rough currents. So many of the islands named after the natural phenomenon of the land itself. So to be displaced from a land that means so much is hugely significant. And although many Marshallese continued to live on their contaminated lands, there were many where that was impossible or undesirable. The UN rapporteur stated, displacement due to the nuclear testing, especially of inhabitants from Bikini, Eniwatak, Rongelap, and Utrock atolls has created nomads who are disconnected from their lands and their cultural and indigenous way of life. For example, the Marshallese engaged in migratory practices to gather different types of cultural goods, ranging from fish, fruits and medicines to material for housing, from the islands and the atolls. And today they are unable to perform these migratory practices and harvest their cultural goods, because in some cases, the islands and atolls have been totally contaminated by nuclear fallout. In addition, it would be considered that in their matriarchal society, land is passed from mother to child. Displacement from their lands has denied Marshallese women the right to exercise their cultural and other rights, and their role as custodians of land and society. The Marshallese have found it difficult to maintain their distinct cultural identity. Loss of health, loss of land, displacement. We grieve with the people of the Marshall Islands for their loss. When I was in Samoa, there were symbols and ceremonies linked to traditional culture. And we in Scotland have a symbolic item that sits in the heart of our Scottish Parliament. The object is called a mace, and on it are carved the key values of Scottish society: justice, wisdom, integrity, and compassion. And today we stand in solidarity with the Marshallese Islands and the Marshallese Islanders, asking for justice, wisdom, integrity, and compassion. We ask for justice for the people of the Marshall Islands, a justice that takes account of all that was suffered and lost. We ask for wisdom for the governments of the Marshall Islands, America, and the United Nations in the decisions they make that will impact on the islanders and the wider Pacific. We call for integrity in the way that all these decisions are made and implemented. And we call for compassion, heartfelt compassion for the people of the Marshall Islands. We remember with you. We hear your voice. We feel compassion for what you suffered. And we, the people of Scotland, stand in solidarity with you on this day of remembrance and beyond. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Iona. Some of you may recognise me from the Faslane Peace Camp or from just knocking around the peace movement in Scotland. Thank you very much to the organisers for having me on to just give a quick introduction to the film. What you're about to see is, obviously it's been created during lockdown for this event, but it's really, it's addressing a need that I think has been there for a really long time. One of the focal points at the Peace Camp since 1985 has been our memorial tree to the victims of the atomic bombings in Japan. And as the campaign has kind of grown and expanded over the years, it's become really apparent that we need something a bit more concrete and solid to kind of mark our recognition of the victims of nuclear tests as well. And so Marshall Islands Remembrance Day this year has really provided a great opportunity for us to kind of right that wrong, as it were. So we now have a memorial tree to the Marshall Islands at camp, and one of our campers is planning on doing a statue to sit on that site as well. And as someone that lived at the camp for several years, I can say that we really do kind of draw our strength from these points on the site, and they do provide a sort of spiritual focal point for people to just kind of pause and reflect on the kind of the greater reasons of why we're all kind of there. So yeah, when I first thought about making this film, I mean, I was just praying it was going to stop snowing long enough for us to get the tree planted and me to quickly film it. But fortunately, the weather did decide to be on our side for once, so we were able to create something a little bit deeper. Special thanks to Corinne Polwart for letting us use her recording for the music, and of course, as always, a special thanks to the peace campers who, keep this fight alive every day of their lives. Yeah, the film's an absolute joy to make, and I really hope you enjoy it too. So without any more from me, here it is, from half a world away.
I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. Sometimes it gets so hard to listen, hard for us to use our eyes when all around the gold is glistening, making sure to keep us down to size. I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. I'm waiting for the planes to tumble, waiting for the towns to fall, waiting for the cities to crumble, waiting till the sea grows. And yes, it's getting hard to listen, hard for us to use our eyes when all around the gold is glistening, making sure to keep us hypnotized. I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. I don't wanna know one thing about evil. I only wanna know about love. I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. And I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love. I don't wanna know about evil. I only wanna know about love.
For Tony, we'll say. For Tony. Corals are resilient, I've been told, and so are we. We've survived worse. Just ask your elders, they'll lift their shirts, show you bunker scars, typhoon tent towns, atomic nightmares of lost, irradiated islands. So this is just another incoming tide to shore up against. Hence seawalls, hence foreign aid, hence consultants, terms of references, a framework for asking each other which island will we move to, which island will be hit first, which island is worth salvaging, the wreck, a slow moving accident, the ultimate disaster, atolic oblivion. As if we haven't experienced this before, as if we haven't been told that evacuation is safer, you'll come home someday. 2030, 2040, long-term versus short-term. We debate this around the table. We do the work, submit reports, but we are short on time. Before the clock strikes midnight, before the pumpkin rots, before our glass island shatters, are we so easily broken? Maybe we need flags to tell us how afraid we should be. We have flags for COVID threat levels, yellow for safe, yellow for prepare, yellow for complacency, yellow worth celebrating. COVID-free. The US is celebrating, part of it anyway. They are dancing in the street and kissing babies because celebrations are worthy, because the US will be back in the Paris Treaty, because it feels like multiple breaths taken at once, like bubbles bursting through reefs. We reassemble ourselves. We gather the calcium carbonate to grow our coral skeletons into sunlight. Look, up ahead, a lush marine garden awaits. For Tony, we'll say. For Tony.
Hello, my name is Brian Quayle. I've been a lifelong campaigner against nuclear weapons, and today I want to talk about the Marshall Islands. One Sunday after church in 1946, a Navy Commodore met the people of the Atoll and told them that they were like the Israelites, a chosen people, and that perfecting the atomic bomb would deliver mankind from future wars. Within 1 month of that conversation, islanders had boarded US ships for relocation. Within 5 months, the tests were conducted. Bikini remains permanently polluted and uninhabitable. 66 nuclear devices were exploded by the United States in the Marshall Islands between 1946 and 1958, the equivalent of 1.6 Hiroshima bombs every day for 12 years. They blew 2 million tons of plutonium a mile high into the sky in 1946. One of these tests was the largest ever made in the US, codenamed Castle Bravo, which at 15 megatons was 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Its flash was also seen from Okinawa, 2,600 miles away. Its radioactive fallout later detected in cattle in Tennessee. The word bikini celebrates the nuclear explosion that destroyed one atoll in the Marshall Islands. The accidental coincidence that the name of the island starts with the syllable bi, meaning two, commemorates the two-piece twin seed, and its explosive sexuality is thus flippantly memorialized. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission describes the Marshall Islands as by far the most contaminated place in the world. Under only consciousness of this atrocity survived in a contentious pun. This touches me personally. I can never forget in 1986, hearing a woman called Anna Rachel from the Marshall Islands speak at a meeting in St. John's Seafood in Bath Street. As a little girl, she wondered that snow falls in the sky after the explosion in Bikini Island. She gave a scene description of the death abnormalities seen on this island. Marshall women give birth not to children, but to things I would all describe as octopuses, turtles, and jellyfish, and other things I never experienced. We don't have Marshallese words to these kinds of babies, because they were never born before radiation came. Women along the map, Lucia, Island, and other articles on the Marshall Islands gave birth to monster babies. One woman on Lucia gave birth to a child with 2 heads. The young girl on the island today with no names, 2 toes in each foot and a missing arm. Most common gave birth defects on Rongelap, a nearby island, and big jellyfish babies. These babies are born with no bones in their bodies and transparent skin. You can see their brains and hearts beating. Many women die from abnormal pregnancy, and most who survive give birth to organs with purple grapes, which will quickly hide away and bury. Annalong told us how she personally had suffered 6 miscarriages. Her sisters carried 13 dead babies. This spread the nightmare world, but when the live birth the girls were performed, some mothers literally go mad. Later she gave testimony for the United Nations about times her quote from her speech and adaptation. What my family, these ancestors, survivors, father, mother, brothers Tommy, Freddie, sister Abby, these are the dead, sisters Lujan, Sarah, Martha, brothers Louis Cunio, Paul. This is our history: blindness, thyroid tumors, miscarriages, cervical babies, mental retardation, sterility, lung cancer, kidney cancer, liver cancer, sarcoma, lymphoma, leukemia. I do not weep for my lost babies. 2 stovers, each jellyfish, lasted pulsating discharge waiting as it's fit. I no longer weep for the dead. The dead do not care. We are the people of the Marshall Islands. We are your experiment. They ended up talking Glasgow. Went up to her, took a little hand in mine. But no one was afraid to see to her then. But it is today that I should then.
Hello. Kate asked me if I would make a wee input to this meeting about the Marshall Islands from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I'm part of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, as well as CND and various other peacenik conglomerations. But it was really through WILF that I've been able to work at an international level to try and do my bit towards ridding the world of nuclear weapons, something I think we would all aspire to. It's strange talking like this because I would so much like to hear the keynote speakers and hear the stories. I would so much like to see Iona's wee film, and I will do, but unfortunately I'm having to make my contribution before I've done that. So that's why I'm not making any reference to other parts of the meeting, which feels very, very odd to me. But anyway, I've been asked to tell you about the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, so I'll do that. It's the oldest peace organisation in the world, a women's peace organisation in the world. It was started 100 years ago during the First World War, when that was happening across Europe. And a lot of women were very engaged with why their sons and their husbands were engaged in this terrible slaughter, all for the sake of some argument that was happening between governments and that had very little to do with their day-to-day lives. And so they decided to meet in Europe and see what they could do and see what suggestions they could come up with. So it was a full meeting of women, thousands of them from all over the place, and at a time when it was really difficult for women to travel anywhere because there was a war on, and because their passports were determined by their husbands or their fathers, not themselves. But they made it, most of them anyway, and they got to Europe, and they came up with 21 resolutions of things that they thought could be done to get rid of the idea of war, of people having it made legitimate that they could kill each other because of disagreements between their leaders. So they came up with some pretty good things. Like, one of the suggestions was that there should be no profit allowed on the manufacture of arms or weapons. They weren't saying you would have to get rid of all weapons immediately, but they did say that nobody should be allowed to make a profit on the sale of a weapon, and that any weapons that were made would have to be done with government permission. So that would have made quite a difference to the arms trade and the development of nuclear weapons, for example. But the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom at that time had two main notions, and they still work from those two main notions. And one was about disarmament. They said that it wasn't right that ideological differences should be decided by the use of force. And the other big issue for them was that people should be included in decisions that are made that affect them. So in that case, in 1915 in Europe, they were talking about the right to vote. It was the struggle for women's suffrage was going on at that time. Last year, or the year that's just gone, was the 20th anniversary of another piece of work that was introduced by the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was a thing called United Nations Security Resolution 1325, which said that women should always have their voices heard in any negotiations on conflict, and that women should be involved in peacemaking processes. And thinking about the Marshall Islands and the idea of, in particular, the women there at that time, and what they were expected to deal with just because of their race, because they were people that could be discounted, that didn't matter. And that profound racism and sexism is absolutely in with the bricks with nuclear weapons. And that's why we need to resolve racism as well as sexism and all forms of oppression if we're really going to walk free from what these things do to human beings and to our planet and to each other. So that's where WILP fits into the story of the Marshall Islanders. I'm really looking forward to seeing the film and hearing the keynote presentations. I know it will be a sober evening for us all, but hopefully there's a lot of love and joy in it as well, as we share our memories and entrench our opposition to nuclear weapons across the planet forever. Thank you.
My name is Hannah Lavery, and I am reading my poem The Long Walk in solidarity. So this is The Long Walk. I have rubies sewn in, and he says that this is where I am, this room with its 3-bar heat. In afternoon stupor, Bing Crosby emerges from his throat. We sit here in this cardboard house, tea drinking and bickering like cats. But I have these blisters buried deep and a whip of the fronds on my back, and even in this central heat, I am cold, sweat. In my hand is my sister's hand, holding Auntie's tiffin tin, still putting off the chore of serving her lunch in her cane chair and her golden throne, Buddha and I light the candles in the cathedral, incense in the temple, hold ledger and spice, swinging her tiffin tin, offering and pushing over my ayah to run by the lagoon, calling out for my brother, but met by Grandma Creole at the shore, reaching into our great ruby days with her old shackles, taking my sister from my arms, leaves me her hand, always to hold. This handing down of corpses, we wear bones, smuggle them with their golden bangles, each one an inheritance, to hold as our neighbours lay down in the ditch to die. Our black crone pulling at the tree, handing my mother an urging of fronds, for when they put us out, like rats in their kitchen, like bats in their attic, she hands down the palm switch. And in this refuge, he croons, this is the end of my story, but I carry these blisters and hold on out this lash of bound leaf. He gets another pot and fetches the packet of McVitie's. I will like this one, he announces, and we spend the rest of the day watching my war made real with white faces. I say it wasn't like that, except the planes. The planes were really bombed before we could get to them. We really did have to walk. Did you know? I tell my granddaughter. My mother made a switch from a palm tree to whip me up the road when I wanted to lie down and die. You wanted to die? She cries. Her eyes, my own eyes, looking back. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Iona MacDonald. I was asked if I would provide some musical interlude for you today. I had hoped to get my very good friend and musical partner in Doghouse Roses, Paul Tasker, to play the guitar on this, but it's not quite working out technology-wise for me. I'm a little backward in that respect. So I'm going to do this unaccompanied. It's an absolute honour to be here. This song is a song by Hamish Henderson. It was adopted by the anti-Polaris movement in the 1960s when American nuclear submarines were stationed on the River Clyde. And it is called Freedom Come All Ye. Rock the wind in the clear day's dawning, blast the clouds, he'll stick out o'er the bay. But there's man not a rock wind blowing through the great glen o' the world the day. It's a thought that would gather rottens. Are there oaks that can gallus fresh and gay? Tak the road and seek the lonings. With their ill ploys to sport and play. Nay, me will her bonny call
Ash te wa when the braggarts crousely craw. No we wains frae pit heeden clacken. More and the ships sailing down the broomy law. Broken families in lands we've harried will curse Scotland, the brave name man, amen. Black and white until they're married. Mark the vile barracks o' their maesters bear. Say come I at him with freedom. Never heed with the hoodies croak for doom. In your house are the bairns o' Adam. We'll find breed Ballybream painted rooms. When MacLean meets with friends in Springburn, are there roses and gains will turn to bloom, and the black lad frae yon